Verge.
What is up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Rendes, also known as Ricky Vans. Today we got a great episode for you. The mixer was working. I got a new mixer, and it's been giving me some issues the last couple episodes. I wasn't sure if it was me or if it was the mixer, what was going on. I think I was incorrectly using it, and now it sounds good. It sounds clear, and I don't have that distraction of having a random hum or hiss or whatnot in the middle of me talking, which only makes me have an even harder time not ranting and trying to gather my thoughts and getting off topic and all those little quirks I have that you guys have probably and hopefully come to love. So, but today we have a great guest for you, Rebecca Costa. She's a scientist, she's a futurist, she's an author. We talk about civilization, we talk about human nature, we talk about happiness, we talk about technology, the pros and cons of it, how it can make our lives better, how it can possibly make our lives worse, and all those things and so many other things. So it was a really, really fun conversation. Sometimes, I mean, just like you guys listening, we have real lives. I mean, unfortunately, this isn't my full-time job. With enough support, hopefully it will be one day. But if with lack of sleep, you have kids, with being tired, with priorities that you have and responsibilities you have, sometimes even just having a little bit of butting heads with a parent or a sibling, a significant other, all these things, at least personally, I really am amazed by people who do podcasts and radio shows consistently and always sound awesome and always sound like they're on their A game. Unfortunately, I'd say I'm human and I'm gonna mess up from time to time and not have the best show possible. But like I said, there's a lot of people who can do it, and I think that's awesome. And I really am always trying to figure out what not to eat, what to eat, how much coffee, how much not coffee, when should I book these shows to try to get the best performance out. Make sure I don't drink too much the night before. I like my glass of wine at night while winding down. So it's just all these little things that can affect the conversation. And, I guess it's because I put so much pressure on myself to make sure I put out the best conversations possible and something that's really worth listening, because I truly, truly appreciate all the Patreon supporters, all the people who hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever it may be. I just really appreciate it. I mean, it blows my mind when people hit me up and say they really like this show. The show was amazing. That was one of my best shows or whatnot. And, I really do appreciate that. And I don't forget those listeners and those fans who have been supporting the show for many years, and a lot of just great new listeners who've hit me up and just let me know how much they love the show and how glad they are that they ran into it. So it's growing, it's continuing to grow, and I think hopefully as I keep putting out these interesting conversations like I have for you today, it can keep on growing. And like I tell you guys, if you can support financially with Patreon, awesome. In our show description on our YouTube channel, RV Theory 6, or just search the Ripple Effect Podcast, you can find links to our Patreon page where you can support the show. And what I'm doing for my Patreon members or my Patreon supporters is that I'm letting you guys know when a show is booked before anybody else knows. I'm letting you know when I have an upcoming special episode on a special topic or a collaboration, all that type of stuff. And I have some of that stuff coming up, which my Patreon members are aware of because they're my Patreon members. And so if you want to get some of that information, because most podcasters, they only tell you who's on the show once it's released. And it's like, okay, I just released this episode. They don't tell you the second they book it. They don't tell you that they have some collaboration with maybe some other guests or a swapcast or something that's upcoming. I mean, and rightfully so, because sometimes you're worried that you're going to tell people about it, advertise it, market it, or whatever, spread the word, and then the show doesn't happen or it gets postponed or whatnot. But I think, why not tell you when that stuff happens? And if it gets postponed, I'll tell you that too. So I just figured it's a cool little way of kind of knowing what's going behind the scenes and just kind of keeping you guys in the loop and a incentive in supporting the show. And I thank you for supporting the show. I mean, if you guys are supporting the show, then you should know what's going on with the show. So that's what I'm doing for my Patreon members. If you guys want to know that type of behind the scenes information, then support the show. But of course, the music, my music project, my solo project is called Theory 6. It's all music that I do myself, guitars, keyboards, vocals, all that stuff. And I haven't done anything in a while. It's kind of taken a backseat to the podcast because the podcast has just become so much fun and just doing so well, and it's become my focus. But eventually, I hope I can get back to doing music. But for the time being, this podcast is definitely my focus. But if you want to support the show, I guess is what I was getting to. If you want to support the show, Theory 6 music is available everywhere. There's digital downloads, and that music goes to also supporting the show. So that's another great way of supporting the show. Obviously, our YouTube channel, RV Theory 6, or just search Ripple Effect Podcast. You can see video versions of our episodes. Anybody who calls in using video, like a few of my past guests, you can actually visually see me and the guests have the conversation. So that's pretty cool. And I think that's it for now. Follow me on Facebook. You can just search me, and if I don't accept your friend request, or if I keep you on a standstill, then just write me a little message. Let me know that you're a fan of the show, and I'll accept your friend request. Also, follow me on Instagram, RV Theory 6, Twitter, RV Theory 6, like our Facebook page, which is the Ripple Effect Podcast. You can look up facebook.com/the Ripple Effect Podcast and do all that stuff. Yeah, connect with us. Write me messages. Tell me what you like, what you don't like. And I always love hearing from you guys. So I think that's it. Also review the show, share the show, all that stuff. Spreading this stuff, these conversations, I feel are very important. And even though I'm not making a living doing this, and I hope one day to do so, this is all hopefully forever going to be open source and no sponsors. And that way the conversation can be the focus and not how to make money or how do I get the most clicks or any of that nonsense. So that's it for now. I guess I'll talk to you guys on the next one. Peace.
Hello?
Hey, Rebecca, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Thanks.
Is this audio okay for you?
Yeah, you sound great. You can hear me? You can hear me just fine?
Yes, I can.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for being with me. I really appreciate it. First of all, are you Portuguese or have some Portuguese ancestors?
I do indeed.
I was curious because, obviously Costa is a very common Portuguese name. And then I saw your Skype name, and then I'm like, wait, is that Pereira? I'm like, either Brazilian or Portuguese. I figured, I'd ask because I was born in Portugal. My parents are from northern Portugal. I was born in Chaves. So, you know how Portuguese people are. We're always excited to find other Portuguese people and be supportive of their work.
Yes, we are ignored.
Yeah, it does seem like that. I mean, it's funny. I'll get together with some friends of mine, and we'll just get excited about basically, any Portuguese person that's doing anything relative or if they're an author, if they're a journalist, or even just recently in the NCAA tournament, we found out that Washington State had 2 Portuguese players. They had this big guy, their center, and this other guy, and so I started watching Washington State games, even though I'm not even a huge fan of college basketball, but me and all my Portuguese friends are watching the games, hoping that they win, just because we want to be supportive of them.
Well, it's interesting. My family came from both Italy and Portugal, but specifically the Azore Islands. And I had a chance before my grandfather passed away to go back to the Azore Islands with him. And he was the first radio operator for ships on San Miguel in the Azores. Wow. So it was kind of interesting to go back and discover that the interest in technology and science went all the way back to when you were setting up radio communications with ships.
Wow, yeah. I mean, the Portuguese, they definitely, if you look at their history, they're definitely an intelligent group of people, you know, and I think there's a lot of things to be proud of too, because you look at just all the conflicts in the world and stuff. For the most part, they kind of stay out of them. You know, you don't really see them in the news with negativity, publicity too often.
Very peaceful, very peaceful, family-oriented. But we have to remember they were the first navigators that were allowed into the country of Japan.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they have influence everywhere. I mean, everywhere from Angola, Mozambique, east to mid. I mean, all these places all over the world. Macau. So it's Portuguese is spoken all over the world, and
that's right.
Yeah, it is and that's a common thing. I remember I had a listener contact me not too long ago, and he was a Muslim who's kind of traveled all over the world, and he lived in Portugal for a while, and he was telling me how out of all the places he went to, one of the places where they seemed the most open to people of other backgrounds and religion was Portugal. He's like, for the most part, people, you know, they don't really care, you know, and they're super friendly. And I have another friend who's playing basketball overseas. He plays professionally in Europe, and he traveled all over Europe. And his favorite place till today is still Portugal. He's like, the people are just so friendly. I don't know if it's something to do with like constantly being near the beach and being with family and community. I think that's a huge part of it. I have a lot of Portuguese friends and immigrants that came here. I live in Ludlow, Massachusetts, and it's right outside of Springfield, Massachusetts, and it's basically a huge Portuguese community. And they always talk about how lazy the Portuguese are that are still in Portugal, you know, and because they all came here, like my parents did, to kind of financially get ahead and work and try to make, I guess, you know, get ahead financially. But I think they lost a little bit of what made them happy prior to all the material things, you know, that a lot of these people, even though they didn't have the material things, a lot of these people wouldn't be clinically depressed when they were back home in Portugal, you know, if they were farmers or wherever they lived. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that even though they didn't have those material things, they did have each other. They had community. My dad's one of 12. My mom's one of 7. Huge families, constantly eating together. You know, my all my ancestors make wine. My dad makes wine. I made wine a few years, you know, which brings people together because you're making it together. You're tasting it together. You're enjoying it together. So I think when a lot of these foreigners come to America, and my wife's Italian, so, you know, same thing with the Italians, they come to America, they end up being so obsessed with this idea of getting financially ahead that I think sometimes you lose a little bit of what, you know, the country you came from had that this country doesn't have, or at least isn't as strong. And that's culture and being family oriented, and the importance of being together and communal. And you know, obviously with your research, and I've heard many interviews with you, you know the importance of us being social creatures and how important it is for us to continue to be social creatures.
Well, that's very true. I mean, we were designed by nature to be a troop-dwelling organism. And so when you look at people who commit heinous acts of mass violence or choose suicide as a way out, you find that one of the precursors is extreme loneliness and disconnected from other human beings. And unfortunately, we are having an uptick in that because people are experiencing social isolation by depending too much on television for entertainment and computer interactions. And we lose that sense of community. One way to look at this is that our genes and our biology doesn't evolve at the same rate that we make technological and scientific progress. There's a bit of a gap, and what our brains and our souls and our emotions need to feel safe, to feel optimistic and joyous, to feel productive, to feel like we have meaning in life. Those things are brought about by living with other people and interacting with other people. They are not brought about by science and technology. And so we're going through a rough patch right now. where that social isolation, there have been studies that have been done by positive psychologists. Let's just get down to data because, from looking into my background, I'm a data wonk.
Yeah.
I don't care what anybody says. If you can't prove it, I don't want to talk about it. But there have been countless studies done that indicate that there are a certain number of hours a day that you must socialize to reach your optimal happiness. You want to take a guess on how many hours a day that is?
It's going to be an unfair guess because I believe the answer is 6.
Yeah, it's 6 to 7 hours a day.
Which is pretty high for...
That's a lot. That's a lot. So one of the things I frequently ask people who are running large chains of assisted living homes is, they want to do a lot of things to create a good standard of living for people that are retired or may even be bedridden or can't get around a lot. And I ask them, how are you going to get them 6 to 7 hours of socializing? Because before you spend any money on, new scooters and a new, little coffee station, you better think about how to give people who are not in the workforce. Because if you're in the workforce, there's a good chance you're getting that 6 to 7 hours. But a third of the population of the United States is going to retire in the next 10 years. And how are they going to get that, right? And how do kids get it that are homeschooled, or are not going to college anymore? They get out of high school and they decide not to go to college. How do you get that 6 to 7 hours?
Yeah, well, I heard you say on an interview before talking about you went to some aging conference or something like that, and you're like, you can't keep putting people just in front of TVs and say that, that's the way you should take care of the elderly, is that's suitable. Just put them in front of the TV, push that wheelchair in front of the TV, and they're good. I think there's a lot to that. I know I've heard you talk about loneliness, and I think anybody who's ever had any grandparents or relatives, once they lose their significant other, usually it's not far after that they start decaying. And I think, loneliness is a huge part of that. I think it's something that we take for granted.
Loneliness is toxic. It will shave years off of your life. It affects your health. We can correlate loneliness to diabetes, heart disease, cancer. It is the big, people talk about the biggest health epidemic. The fastest growing health epidemic is loneliness and depression. It takes a toll. And this is why we see some longevity, rates sliding backwards. So it's very hard when you come up against that number. That's a hard number. That's not a debatable number. 6 to 7 hours every single day. You need to socialize. And that's why I'm saying that sometimes science and technology get ahead of evolution, because your body has been designed to be part of a troop. It needs that interaction in order to generate the kinds of chemistry in your brain, in your gut, in your physiology to provide mood elevation. And this is not something we can debate or shortcut or fix. I guess we can fix it by medicating everybody, but look at the fastest growing group right now in the United States that is being prescribed antidepressants. It's under the age of 12.
Yeah, I have a huge issue with that because I have 2 kids, and I think a lot about how other parents just get sucked into, give your kid a pill for this ADD, give them a pill for this, give them a pill for that. And I think there has to be some room to just let kids have different personalities, different energy. We're not all similar. And I think now we're almost over-analyzing everything from, at the age of 2, they have to be saying this many words at the, and it's just like all these milestones and all these things. And it's like, we just want everything to be like this cookie cutter, just exactly the same. And if you don't fall into those guidelines, then then here's a pill for it. And unfortunately, big pharma is the biggest spending, the biggest lobbyists. They spend more money in lobbying than anybody, and they have incredible pull. And, you with your science background, I mean, that it's unfortunate that the FDA and big pharma sometimes are in bed together, and they kind of get to, do their own research. The FDA doesn't do any research. So, and then you get the research from pharmaceutical companies that have obviously an interest in getting this stuff patented and approved. So it just, the whole thing just, I just think we end up having this over-medicated world, and a lot of it probably has to do with what we talked about, this lost connections, this just not having community. I've had Johan Hari on who actually wrote the book called Lost Connections, and talking about how a lot of depression, a lot of the anxiety, a lot of this unhappiness isn't what we think it is. Even substance abuse isn't because this substance is addictive as much of, or maybe it's more because they're just in an unhappy place and they're looking for happiness somewhere, and it's giving them some type of happiness. I'm sure you're familiar with the mice experiment, Rat Park, where they gave cocaine or heroin in the water, and they kept coming back and drinking it until they died. So, and then I believe some scientists in Canada created this thing called Rat Park and let them, basically created its natural habitat where they could roam around. And the mice came back, drank the water, and then never came back. And what they learned was that it wasn't coming back so much because the substance was addictive, but it was because it was unhappy. And do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I agree with that a great deal. And in fact, my next book that I'm working on right now is What Does Science Know Are the Building Blocks of Human Happiness? Because we've amassed so much research and data right now that is not available to the person on Main Street. And so when you think about human happiness, right, or unhappiness, the flip side of it, what do we really know? It kind of feels like some random thing. Sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're not. But what do we really know? And it turns out we've done phenomenal studies. We've discovered that up to 60% of your ability, your capability to be happy is actually genetically based. And I think, people are pretty shocked when they hear that, because you think that your ability to be happy is all in your mind, right? All these speakers and people tell you can just decide to be happy, right? And then you read things like Viktor Frankl's book, The Man's Search for Meaning, and he's in the middle of a concentration camp, and yet he sees acts of kindness and happiness, moments of joy. You get an extra little piece of bread and you feel really happy. And so you hear these stories, and then you go back and you find out that 60% of it's genetically based. Well, how do we know it's genetically based? That's the first thing that people ask me. And I say, well, we've studied monozygotic twins that were separated at birth. And we've asked them over periods of 10, 20, 30 years to report on their happiness. And yes, their happiness kind of goes down. Bad things happen to them. A spouse dies, they lose, their house or lose money in a business. It goes up and down. But generally over time, they have a stable level of happiness, even separated at birth. And so now we've done studies for decades and decades, and we know that about 60%, somewhere between 50 and 60%, is genetically determined, your optimism is. But we also know that within that 30 to 40%, it depends on the choices that you make. Some of the choices that you make are going to absolutely 100% make you happier. And some choices you make are going to make you unhappy. And do you want an example?
Yeah, please.
Okay, I'll give you an example that cannot be argued. If you buy the worst house in a very wealthy neighborhood, you will be unhappy. You might add more money to your bank account as the price of the houses go up, and you try to fix yours up to look like the wealthiest. But if you surround yourself with people that are noticeably more wealthy and more successful than you, it is in our DNA to compare ourselves to others. We cannot help it. We deny it. We say we don't, but our happiness scores go down On the other hand, if you move into a neighborhood that's comparable, people drive comparable cars, they own comparable houses, they send their kids to comparable schools and all, your happiness goes up. And if you go into a neighborhood that's worse than your station in life, your happiness goes up. So those people who are social climbers, right, and decide, well, we can barely afford it, but we want to live in a really premium neighborhood and always be frightened that we don't have enough money and we shouldn't be here. They're just sentencing themselves to be unhappy every single day.
Yeah, I've seen studies, and I think I've heard Dr. Christopher Ryan talk about it, who wrote Sex at Dawn, and he's actually in the middle of, I believe his book's coming out this year or next year, called Civilized to Death, which he talks about how studies that show that when the difference between the poorest people and the richest people is smaller, then there's less unhappiness, less depression.
That's absolutely been proven by Nobel-winning economists.
That's interesting. What I didn't know is what you mentioned, that it's in our DNA to do that. You don't think it's marketing, or obviously everybody knows the history of it.
It's in our DNA because in earlier times, human beings, when they were troop-dwelling organisms, they needed to assess their position in the troop. It was very important to know who the alpha female and males were and where your station was. Otherwise, you would be killed. You would be killed. Troop-dwelling life is very hierarchical. And it's very important to know your station and then to do everything possible to improve your station, because an improved station meant you would have a better mate selection for reproduction. You would have access to better foods and nutrition. You would have more access to protection. So it's very important in a troop-dwelling organization that you know where you stand in the hierarchy. And so we have our antenna out when we meet people, when we go to work, when we move into a neighborhood. We're constantly assessing where we stand in the hierarchy. And this is why when you're low down in the hierarchy, it's a sentence for unhappiness. And yes, absolutely, economists have proven without a shadow of a doubt, these are Nobel-winning economists that have proven that a large income gap in society, the larger that gap is, the more unhappiness, frustration, depression, suicide, health issues there are in that society. And so when you think about the growing income gap in the United States, that is not just an economic problem. That's the thing that our leaders are not talking about, that they must begin to talk about, because that big income divide is a mental health issue.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting to look at it that way. I think a little bit, and this has to do with something that you talk a lot about, and I guess to transition into your book, it's complexity. It's in your book on the Verge, I think the thing about complexity is that I think it's become counterproductive, right? In my opinion, I think that we've tried to find these complex ways to fix our problems, but I almost feel like we've created so many complex ways to fix the problem, and our world has become so complex that now it's hurting us. Like we can't keep up with the complexity. You look at like physical stress. If I go to the gym, if I do landscaping, some construction work, like I did today, I'm physically fatigued, but I don't feel like I feel actually good. I feel like I'm physically fatigued, but I feel like I got something accomplished. I feel like my body was designed to do that, and it doesn't. I actually feel good mentally. Where dealing with all the mental stress of like, bills and debt and have to keep up with, all your priorities of picking up the kids and when do I drop them off and who has to go to the grocery store and who do, this and that and all this stuff. And then we drive into our suburbs where we don't talk to our neighbors. We, close the garage and hope nobody talks to us and do it all over again. I think, this idea of thinking that this is progress or this is the goal that we should strive to have, I think we have to almost rethink what progress is.
I agree. We do have to rethink it. We have gotten so far away from what the human organism actually needs and wants. We don't understand. What we need is a manual for how the actual biology of humans operate, right? And so much of what we are doing is counterproductive to how humans have actually evolved. Let me give you an example. There's something called the hedonic treadmill, right? And I love that term, even though it kind of sounds scientific and nobody really understands what that means. But what the hedonic treadmill is that after years and years of evolution, we are designed to get over happiness, right, and fulfilling events much faster than we do negative events. So when something really bad happened to us in earlier times, like a predator almost caught us and ate us, that memory stuck with us, that fear, that adrenaline stuck with us for a very, very long time because it was a matter of self-preservation. Bad events that made us feel fearful or sad or scared, all of those emotions were designed to preserve us and make sure that we would develop offspring and propagate. But happy events, like finding an apple that was really delicious on the ground, rarely meant life or death. And so we are biologically, and I mean from the feel-good chemicals, they disperse much faster than the feel-bad chemicals in our body. And this is what I mean by having an instruction manual, because once you understand this, you realize that when something good happens to you, like you buy something you were saving for, or you win something, or you meet someone and you fall in love, from the moment that you begin to feel good, it begins to taper off. It tapers off almost immediately. And after a while, you're not getting any hits from it at all. You don't get any feel-good chemicals from it. And then you've got to go get another one. And that's why we call it the hedonic treadmill. We're on a hedonic treadmill, one after the other, to look for events that will make us feel good because we get over them so fast. And the more quickly we can service that, the faster we have to run on the treadmill. So now I want something, and I don't have to go to a store and try to find it and walk all over town and maybe go to another town. No, I just click on Amazon, and the following day it arrives. I open it up, and from that moment on, my happiness is declining. I've got to go out and get another hit. And so this is where some of what's going on technologically and scientifically is actually in conflict to what allows humans to live good lives.
Yeah, well, one thing you talked about, which I think kind of scratches the surface of epigenetics and just, I forget what the article is called, like Inheriting Father's Fears. I talked about it with Rupert Sheldrake when he was on, and it's interesting because your trauma and all these things that happen to you, and I wonder if there's some relation to the twins experiment. And because if your parents have some type of trauma or deal with some type of trauma, and this goes back to the nature versus nurture argument, and it seems like you can actually inherit some of your parents' trauma or fears or whatnot, and I'm sure you're familiar with the mouse experiment where they shock them when they spray this scent, and like 2 generations later, they still have that same type of panic reaction to that scent, even though they've never been shocked. And but it seems like trauma goes further than any happy memories, right? It seems like
that's correct.
Yeah,
that's correct, because they've done the reverse. They have sprayed sense and delivered food, delivered pleasurable experiences, and those did not transmit.
And I wonder, like you keep hitting on.
Well, because the negative experiences have to do with survival.
Yeah, yep.
Have to do with life or death. You must learn from the negative experiences, right? But the positive experiences actually have outside of sex specifically, have almost nothing to do with survival.
Yeah,
and so they're just a bonus. They're just a bonus, and that's why they pass very quickly to make room for the negative emotions, because the negative emotions are imperative to survival.
Yeah. Huh. Now, I wanted to get your opinion on universal basic income, and the reason why this conversation reminds me of that is because I think one of the issues, the crises we have, is that this depression and unhappiness has to do with the fact that we've kind of created a world where people have to work jobs they dislike. They go to college, they get in this debt, then they end up working a job they don't like to pay off that debt, and then maybe they buy some material things to give them some temporary satisfaction, and then, like you said, that satisfaction goes away, and they continue to work this job, and it's this vicious cycle of just buying things for temporary satisfaction to deal with the job you dislike and the life that basically consumes your life. Most people spend more time at work than they do at home with their family. They they basically all their best years of their lives, all their energy, when they're in their best moods, it's usually when they're at work. And then when they come home, it's when they're burnt out, tired, and that's when your family gets to try to spend some time with you. And so I think it's a huge issue, but universal basic income could possibly be a solution, because you could spend more time maybe doing the things you enjoy and not be so concerned about, okay, well, now I have to make sure, let me take the higher paying job, not because I enjoy it, but because I'm going to deal with the headaches and the extra stress, and then I can pay this debt off or pay these bills, or maybe buy that house that I think is going to bring me happiness that might not necessarily bring me happiness. What do you think about that?
I think it has never been tried on a large enough scale that people worry about what happens when you create some kind of baseline. We kind of have it already when you think about welfare. Welfare is an ugly word to most people. But when you think about Social Security and welfare, those are sort of floors under which we don't want people to fall, right? So when you talk about universal guaranteed income, we're just talking about a more reasonable version of those things, which allow people to know that they can pursue avocations that are not exclusively designed to allow them to live. They have those programs in Sweden and Norway and a number of Scandinavian countries, who, when the United Nations does their world's happiest countries, those countries always rank first, second, and third in the world.
Yeah, what
does
the
that tell you? The United States is usually like around 8 or 9 or 10. And then, of course, a slew of African countries that are struggling with basic survival issues are at the bottom of the list. Once you get past those survival issues, I think you have to begin to think about meaning and fulfillment, and you have to design societies where people are connected. I'm not so sure it's the, and again, I'm a data wonk, so you'll forgive me on this, but I'm not so sure it's the income so much as it is the pressure to make that income on your own. You don't have any income or social support. You don't live with your family. You men are expected to marry and have children and take care of their own families. But it's rare now to have extended family living near you that can, provide childcare. And, if you decide to take a risk on a business, take that risk with you. You could borrow money from each other, right, in times of duress. All eat together when the economy gets, poor. That social fiber has so broken down that it's not just the level of income and the pressures, right, to provide for your own family. It's the fact that you have to do it alone and that you have no safety net, no fallback. So the elderly are scared, young people are scared, moms and dads are scared. You know, what's the latest poll say? That the vast majority of Americans don't have $400 in the bank they could use in the event of an emergency. That's a real statistic. It's a sobering statistic. You know, and so what do we do about that? Well, if we know that a large income gap correlates with massive numbers of depressed and suicidal young people, if we know that people are feeling like they got to go it alone and they no longer have extended families and they have no social support, you know, one of the most important things to feeling happy is one question people listening to your podcast can ask themselves. Do you have someone in your life you can turn to in times of trouble? That one question will determine whether somebody is happy or not. And the number of people that I run into that say no, they don't have a person they can turn to in times of trouble is astounding.
Yeah, and that has to be scary. I mean, that you want to talk about anxiety, just thinking that, you know, just having the pressure of knowing that you're in on it by yourself. There's no help. If anything goes wrong, it's on you. There's no, like you said, it's yeah. I mean, I think
you were not designed to live that way. You're not biologically designed to live that way. That, you know, it's like, you know, that we've broken down the human genome and we only have a 3 or 4% difference in genetic material from a bonobo monkey. So the cat is out of the bag. We know that this is a fact. A single bonobo monkey is a dead bonobo monkey. If it gets ejected out of the troop, it is going to march alone into the jungle and die.
And it's
we have a 3 to 4% difference in genetic material. It is a kiss of death. Isolation, loneliness, not having anybody you can turn to in times of trouble is the kiss of death. And so you have to change that. And anybody listening who says, well, I don't have anybody, I would say right now, you know what? Tomorrow morning you wake up and you click on your computer or your mobile device and you find some organization you can volunteer for. You have got to go immediately. They'll take you as a volunteer and you'll make friends right away. And they'll be there for you in times of trouble.
Yeah, well, and a bonobo by itself is unhappy because all they do is have sex with one another. So I'm sure it'd be a very lonely life. It is amazing how and they're peaceful. They're fairly peaceful too.
Absolutely. So you know what? We have to go back to our biological roots. It doesn't matter how fast technology progresses. We are biological creatures that evolve extremely slowly. Yes, there's epigenetics, and every now and again, nature takes a shortcut. But that's a rare thing. Yeah. That's a rare thing, and it's generally tied to something regarding our survival, a threat. But the positive stuff isn't genetically transmitted, and it comes from acknowledging our genetic roots, our evolutionary roots. What are we evolved to be as little creatures on the earth? What makes that little creature happy, right? Safety, food, water, a safe dwelling. We kind of check, we've become industrialized. We can check those off really quickly. Then what comes after that?
Well, what is it? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Isn't that was one theory of what?
That's exactly right. Yeah. But we've done all that. Something has gone haywire because according to Maslow, once you've got food, shelter, safety, you should be moving on to well-being, a sense of belongingness. And we somehow skipped that. Something's gone wrong.
Yeah, that's a huge issue. That's where the universal basic income, because the thing about welfare is that you're basically giving people an incentive not to work, because if you stay within that low bracket, then you get this money. But a universal basic income, you could work or not work and you would still get the money. So you might get some people that are like, okay, well, I'm getting this money anyways. Let me pursue something I enjoy without having all the anxiety of, okay, I need to pursue something that makes me money, not something I enjoy. But this goes back to our school systems too, because I didn't do well in school at all, and I thought it was because I didn't like learning. And little did I know, thanks to the internet, that I had access to all this information and interesting interviews and books and lectures and TED Talks and podcasts. And I'm like, oh, I love learning. It was just the fact that school made it boring. And I think we keep telling people like, hey, just learn this stuff because it'll get you a good job, or pursue this because you'll make a lot of money, and all that type of stuff. And nobody tells you to pursue something you enjoy, or pushes you to pursue like philosophy or something that maybe you're more uncertain about which career path you're going to go down if that's what you focus on. So I mean, don't you think that's a huge issue? Like, we should start with like kids and focus more on like provoking thought and all this stuff, and maybe we've gotten too focused on capitalism, and it's all about me and be cutthroat. And because I mean, that's kind of an issue too with we have a little family-owned construction company, and one thing I hate about the construction industry, and I'm sure it's similar with every industry, is that how cutthroat it is. There's no such thing as hey, I bend over backwards for you this time, and then next time, when I need something, you have my back. There's none of that. It's all, and then the worst part is the most successful people, you see, they're cutthroat. It's always about the numbers. It's always about quarterly gains. It's always about profit margin and how do I make maximum profit. And so, and I think when you have that type of mindset in America, because this is the country I grew up in, so I guess I can only talk about America. In America, it seems like the most successful people are people that have that type of mentality. So you end up rewarding people who have that type of mentality. So financially, you get ahead, but then you kind of burn bridges and don't have as much time for your family and friends because you're so obsessed with this idea of getting financially ahead. And then it creates this unhappiness because you don't have...
What's our definition of success in the United States? That's wealth,
our issue. Yeah.
Or fame.
Exactly.
And fame translates into wealth. You get an agent and you get commercial deals and endorsement deals and all that. So you're either pursuing wealth or fame. Those are two really narrow lanes. There's so much more. Life has so many more dimensions, right? But that is all this culture values. It does not value knowledge.
You're right.
It does not value achievement. I ask people many times, I go, can you name one woman scientist?
And then I'm guessing
one woman scientist. And people go, no, I can't. Right? If I ask them to name a male scientist, it's usually Carl Sagan or Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah.
Or it might be Stephen Hawking. They can get maybe 3 or 4 deep. After which the list tapers off pretty fast. And then I have to remind them that half of the male scientists they named are dead. And then I say, well, name one woman genius. And the only name that ever comes up for a woman genius, apparently women are not capable of being geniuses, because the only name that ever comes up is Madame Curie, and she was not really a genius. She was a phenomenal chemist and biologist, but not really a genius. But they'll name Einstein, and they'll name others, Tesla, and on, and they usually get 3 or 4 deep, but most of them are dead. So it's a curious time that we live in. We don't think of Mark Zuckerberg or Ted Cook or even Steve Jobs as geniuses. I don't know who our geniuses are. I don't know who our scientists are. But we know who the Kardashians are. And we know who Warren Buffett is and who Bill Gates is. We know who the millionaires and the billionaires are. And we know who the people who get, millions of hits on YouTube are. But we don't really know who our governor and our senators and our representatives are. We don't really know who the scientists are. We don't know who won the Nobel Prize, in any category ever. It's a curious time, It's a very curious time.
Well,
and I think that it narrows the scope of what humanity can be. Because humanity, Ed Wilson, the famous naturalist, he told me something that was really fascinating. I want to share with you and your audience today. He was talking to me about science and technology because I'm such a geek, and I was always talking to him about new things, quantum computing that's coming out, and nanobots, and he's like a father figure to me, and he would always nod his head and listen patiently as I was getting really excited about all this cool stuff. And one day he said to me, if aliens from outer space ever do make communication with the Earth, or they come down and see us, he said, you do realize they're not going to actually be very interested in our mathematics or our science, because we get further and further out into space, and we're discovering that those rules that govern physics and science and all, they are holding. So allegedly, aliens would already have our technology and science. They'd already know what we know. They would already have developed that. He said what they're really going to be fascinated by is our music and our art, because that will be uniquely human. And the mathematics and the science, not so much.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah, what makes us human, and unlike anything else in the entire universe, as we get further and further out, is going to be art and music and dance and culture. That's what they're going to be fascinated with, but not necessarily what we understand about science. That's going to be the same as anywhere else.
Well, I think the thing about music or arts in general, and actually, I played in a band growing up, and I still play music, and I have musicians on, and I think that the thing people love about art in general is that it taps into something the thing that makes us uniquely different than a robot, and that's the fact that we have emotions and memories, and the music can bring you back to it could be a song that was big when you were in high school or college or whatever, or when you first started dating your wife or husband, and I can bring you back to that moment, and or music can be relatable. You can go through some really depressing time in your life and listen to a song that seems to be written for your life, and you feel like, oh wow, I'm not the only one going through this. And so I think that's something we love about art is the fact that it.
Yes, but think about what we've done to that. We don't pay artists to just continue to create unless it's leverageable economically. Everything is determined on whether it has a commercial upside. And the only things that we value are those things that have a commercial upside. A gallery owner will hang your paintings in their gallery for a couple of days, but if they don't sell anything, they're out of there. I mean, everything has to translate to some kind of monetary upside. And that's a shame because, when I was younger, before I became a biologist and also studied sociology, I wanted to study philosophy. I started reading Kant and Schopenhauer and all those guys when I was probably 11, 10 years old.
Wow.
I was doing heavy lifting. I was so immersed in philosophy. I thought there was no higher calling in this world. And unfortunately, I came from a middle-class family, and my dad said, well, I don't know what job you could get. I mean, there's no job for philosophers. What would you do? And I said, I would think. I would think and I would write. And my dad said, yeah, but rent. What about rent and food and gasoline? And he had my best interest at heart. I don't blame him. I don't resent him at all. He wanted to be sure I could support myself. And so when I went to college, I was required to work my way through college. And the more I studied the philosophy, the more worried my parents became, the more anxious they became. And they said, well, maybe you should think about dentistry school, or an accounting degree, something you could make a living with. Well, they finally settled on biology. I'm not sure. He thought maybe I'd get a job in a lab or something. And I got lucky. My family settled right in what later became Silicon Valley. So when I came back from college, I was educated to do nothing in the practical world, absolutely nothing. I'd been a grocery clerk working my way through school. Then I had a degree in sociology and biology, which meant I knew nothing. And I got lucky. A Silicon Valley company picked me up and said, we think you're a very good writer, and we want you to write tech manuals and data sheets for us. And that's how I got my start in technology. I fell in love with it. I loved what was going on. This is when the first chips were being developed by Bob Noyce of Intel, and Steve Jobs and Wozniak were developing the first personal computers. And, you know, all of Silicon Valley was an explosive time. And I was very lucky to be in the right place at the right time, or I'm pretty sure I would have become an accountant or a dental assistant. Because that's how you could pay rent and eat food. Yes, I believe that humankind is suffering from a narrowing of values that are tied only to fame and economics, when there's so much more to us. Where are the philosophers? Where are the artists who we don't understand and you can't make any money off of? Where are the people who would just really like to have a career in music and may not ever be that good? Can we have room for that? Will we save that? I mean, look at the school music programs and athletic programs and art programs. We've decimated them. In most colleges, we'd spend, hundreds of millions of dollars building a sports stadium so that we can make money, but no galleries, right? No scholarships for music. I mean, it's very tragic that there is a narrowing of our definition of what humans can be and what will make them happy. And so it's not shocking that we would see massive rates of depression and suicide. Suicide is up everywhere in the world. And if we want to, if people want to pay attention to something has gone wrong, that metric alone ought to be an indicator.
Yeah. So, you're also a futurist and you talk a lot about future technologies and things that we possibly be able to do in the near future and stuff. And I mean, what's your thoughts on, transhumanism, singularity? I mean, all these things about humans and technology coming together. Do you think it's going to solve these problems, or are they going to complex them and maybe make them worse? Are we,
I think that very shortly, I think we're going through a very difficult transition. And very soon, machines will show us the way out. Machine learning and artificial intelligence will show us the way out. We will be turning over very, very complex decisions and procedures over to machines who are far more capable of doing the work and the jobs than we are. And then as a society, we're going to have to decide how we live and how we treat people when our skills are no longer required because machines do it better. There's a study out now that says 60% or more of the jobs in the United States are under threat to be automated. It will not require human beings anymore.
Yeah, because
so what happens then? What are those human beings going to do?
Those truck drivers are going to have to learn how to code or something, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we all don't want to be coders. That's not going to make us all happy. All of us aren't inclined to be techies. So the real question is, what will we do? And I believe that society will go through a correction. It will correct the mistakes that we have now. It will reorganize itself. And if it doesn't, then, the extent to which you make small adaptations along the way to accommodate changes in the environment dictate how painful the correction is going to be. If you succeed in adapting, right, incrementally, then in the final stages of a correction, it may be just unnoticeable. But if you fail to adapt social institutions, right, and then what happens is there is a very radical correction, and it's generally very painful. And Ray Dalio talks about this. He recently wrote a book called Principles, and he talks about this. He talks about the fact that we will either correct violently and painfully, or we will correct incrementally. And the verdict right now, and I happen to agree with his assessment, is about 50-50.
Well, your books, The Watchman, Rattle, I mean, you've kind of analyzed and researched the fall of other civilizations. I mean, do you think that we're going down that path where, you know, before this transition is over, we need to hit the bottom before we rethink things or reevaluate the way we've created our civilization?
I don't know. It's hard to say. You know, there are signs that a civilization is going to reach a bottom point. And that generally is that the information that people on Main Street need to be able to understand in order to make rational decisions about their life begins to become too complex. And eventually it becomes, you know, social systems become so complex that public decisions and social institutions begin to behave irrationally. There are many that believe we're at that second stage right now where we're behaving irrationally. And at that point, public policy becomes irrational, and that sets us up for some cataclysmic event to cause the society to collapse. I believe we will go through a major economic collapse and restructuring. Collapse doesn't mean everybody dies. It just means that the social institution is no longer viable. It could not transform itself fast enough or accurately enough. And so it just comes apart. And I believe that right now, if you look at how currencies are valued and how the stock market makes these wild swings depending on what President Trump tweets, that we're going through a very unstable period of time. And this is generally what has happened in previous civilizations, from the Mayans, the Khmer, Ming Empire, Egyptian Empire, Roman Empire. You can see that kind of activity is a precursor. So it is likely that we will see a unilateral economic collapse that will affect all global markets. And but all that means is that it will reorganize and emerge a better system for us. And that may be a universal cryptocurrency that is backed by all governments. I think that is inevitably what will happen. We won't, because right now currency values are completely political and they're not tied to anything. So what we need is a neutral international currency, and that will likely happen in, I would say, the next 25 years.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin and a lot of other things kind of made people rethink currency and just all the manipulation with it. I mean, that's the thing about so much of our system. It can be easily manipulated. You know, we like to think that it's, and you with your science background, you know, I'm sure you probably have a similar opinion that there's nothing scientific about Wall Street. There's nothing, like you said, a president's tweet or if Musk ends up having a joint with Joe Rogan on his podcast, you know, it can make stock prices drop or go up, and it's like all these little things. It's all speculation, and all these little things can have such an effect on you know, Wall Street, and so it just seems like the big, you know, the whole thing's just a big kind of just rigged game.
Well, think about it. What is a stock supposed to reflect? What is the value of a stock supposed to reflect? It's supposed to reflect the value of that company, right?
Yep.
What people feel is the value of that company. Now, valuation in the real world is based on your assets, on your sales, your profitability, what new products you have in the pike that are coming down. It used to be the analysts would assess all of those things, right? Your liabilities, all of that, and put it into a formula and say, well, we think the valuation of the company is X. But when the stock market takes a dive, and all companies on the index go down, it means that something happened that made every company in that sector or on the entire market worth less than 5 minutes ago. That's impossible. It's impossible they're all worth less. They all didn't do the same thing. They all don't have the same products. They don't even have the same profile. They didn't all get together and do something unilaterally. So we know that values are completely emotional. And that is leading to absolute instability. So we have a lot of things that are, economically bearing down on us. The fact that automation is going to remove jobs. The fact that the average family is in debt to, I think it's $18,000 or $20,000 per household. The fact that the country is trillions of dollars in debt, right? And with no possibility of being able to repay that, with more debt coming along. The fact, all of these things are converging on us at one time. And you do get to a point where the pile-on is too great to reverse. Now, I don't know if we're there. I'm not that good of a futurist. I can't call the day or the time, but I can say that too many elements are now beginning to stack up where the odds of being able to reverse it are not good.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the whole automation thing is interesting because maybe if we did live in a world, I've heard Douglas Rushkoff say this, and he's been on my show a few times, and it's interesting this idea that we could have, or we presently have, probably enough automation, or in the near future we would have enough automation where people could work, a month out of the year or a week out of the year or something, something like that. We could spend more time doing the things you wanted to do growing up, and that's thinking and writing, and spend less time doing, the work that a robot could do. And maybe that could be a possibility of having a brighter future where we could spend more time, in communities doing. I mean, you see it now with just kids. It almost seems like technology, and this is the thing, like technology, sometimes we think it's going to do one thing and the outcome ends up being different. You look at social media, how it was meant to bring people together. You could communicate with people more often, nonstop. And then in a way, it's actually made people less social because now they don't really interact as much in person, or they're constantly staring at their phone and they'd rather be in this digital world than they would in the physical world. And so I think even with the future, I mean, there's a lot of maybe good intentions and, hey, maybe this could fix this problem or this could fix that problem. But and then the reverse could happen. I mean, do you think that's a possibility too, that like this just automation and all these things, like, we think that technology is going to be our savior, but could it possibly have some type of backlash? Could it could the opposite actually happen?
I don't think so, because, when you think about the Paleolithic emotions that enter into any human decision, whether it's a judge, right, that's sentencing somebody, or whether it's a surgeon that just had an argument with his wife and now has to cut you open and fix you. I mean, when you think about humans, we suffer from Paleolithic emotions and true cognitive limitations in the number of variables we can consider on any particular decision. Computers like quantum computing, they don't have those limitations. They look at the facts, the data, and they don't really care what the data says. They're going to base it strictly on data. I trust that a lot more than I trust humans to make those judgments. And people don't like it when I say I trust a computer more than I trust a human. because a human is going to, there are a lot of factors that come into play. And more we're trusting, whether we believe it's the right thing or not, more and more we're trusting computers. I mean, think about Alexa. I mean, you call out Alexa and you ask her what the weather's going to be today, and she faithfully reports it. She doesn't think, oh, you're having your kid's birthday party, I feel really bad. Maybe I'll just say, maybe it might rain, instead of it's definitely going to rain and ruin your kid's birthday party. I mean, computers don't tend to try to soften anything. They give you a neutral reading. I think the world will be better off when decisions are based on fact.
But it isn't, I mean, we like to believe that, science and robots are unbiased, but the people doing the programming or the analyzing of the information, I mean, they're human, so emotions are going to come in and play, and they're going to have some type of biasness, wouldn't they? I mean, wouldn't that have some effect on things a little bit? I mean, you see it with science. There's I forget, I think it was Nature who had this thing where like 70% of scientists said they couldn't recreate the same scientific experiment to have the same outcome, and there's been tons of research on that, on just how much science is maybe cherry picked some of the information to get the outcome you want, or and stuff like that, or the holes in science. You get somebody like I know, especially in health and nutrition, because I'm a big fan of just constantly researching health and nutrition. Gary Taubes talks about just all the holes in nutrition and science and health science, and how you can kind of find a flawed experiment to get you the outcome that you want. And a lot of science, people have this outcome that they're kind of looking for, and it ends up having an effect on what exactly you're putting your emphasis on, and how maybe you conduct the experiment. So isn't that an issue too? Because I mean, we, at the end of the day, the people creating these scientific experiments, creating the robots, programming them, they're going to have some type of biasness. So I mean, do you think that's going to be an issue?
No, I don't, because I think you can have all the bias as a human being you want and as a programmer you want, but self-learning machines will bust you. They're smarter than you. They know what you're doing, and they're not going to let you.
But if they get that smart, isn't it? I mean, aren't we starting to talk about, like, the Terminator and the idea of I mean, possibly even realizing, and of course this is always the AI argument, is right. Well, once they realize they don't need humans, why would we exist? I mean, do you have any? Do you see there any danger in computers being that smart, or in advancing AI?
Computers don't say, well, why do I need you or don't need you? They don't. They don't respond the way that humans do. It's a false construct for me when people say, well, what if they decide to do away with humans? And they don't decide to do away with humans. That's a Paleolithic emotions that humans would have. I don't need you anymore, so I'll do away with you. But what if artificial intelligence doesn't work that way?
What if you?
It's not going to start decimating the Earth. In fact, I would say if we had depended on artificial intelligence, it would say, look, let's look at the facts of climate change, right? And now let's throttle back on the amount of fossil fuels you can develop, and let's do this and let's do that, and let's see if let's look at the data, see if we're getting any reversal. I mean, I think we're assigning some kind of nefarious possibilities to artificial intelligence because our minds are small, and we think in terms of that. Like, will they get jealous? Will they, get rid of us? I mean, it's not going to work that way. And if you try to trick them by assigning them some nefarious, task, some evil task you're going to program them to do. You have to understand they're connected to all other machines and all other data. And what you're asking them to do will be contrary to everything else that is known. And it won't work. It won't work. It's like having one wrong piece of data in an entire cloud of data. It will get expunged.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess, I don't, much more about this topic than I do, but I've heard people like Elon Musk and Sam Harris and I believe other, well-known scientists have talked about, the fear of AI and what it could mean. And I don't know, I almost feel like when you're talking about computers that could analyze so much information and as complex as they are, I don't know. I just feel like sometimes there is and maybe it's just the fear of the unknown, right? Not knowing, but it's maybe I've watched too many scientists.
Are you fearful of humans that make decisions on your behalf in Washington, D.C.? Are you fearful? Do you live in a state of fear of them?
No, I mean, I wouldn't say fear, but I definitely think that, yeah, I mean, maybe you could say that. I mean, just in regards to, I mean, well, when you're talking about politics, I mean, you obviously lobbying and then other interests have a huge influence on what decisions they're making. So, yeah.
Yeah, but just imagine none of that would work. Lobbying wouldn't work, right?
Well,
trying to program a computer to do something that all the knowledge on the internet would indicate would be wrong won't work. You can't lie. That won't work because facial recognition, tonal analysis, all of that won't work. Everything that causes problems in society will not work anymore.
Yeah, and
once machine learning takes over, you don't get to be evil. It will detect that you're depressed and you're going to commit a violent act and warn the legal system beforehand. All of this will be taken care of. It's just right now we have irrational fears of what it will be like. It'll be wonderful is what it'll be like.
So you truly think that somebody, you could predict if somebody's going to commit a crime? I mean,
we can almost predict it now. We can almost predict it now. We just don't have the legal means to do anything because we don't want to live in a world like Minority Report, that Tom Cruise movie where,
exactly.
We knew within 99.9%. But think about it now. Somebody commits a mass murder and we work backwards. And it's just unnerving because as we work backwards, we find out they announced it on Facebook that they were going to do it, the time and the date, and how they were going to do it and where they were going to go. And we noticed that they were on antidepressants for the last year. And we noticed, like in the case of Stephen Paddock, the Las Vegas shooter, he sent his girlfriend away and sent her $100,000, said, don't come back to the United States. It's not safe for you here. And he started buying tracer rounds and he bought more weapons and he bought multiple hotel rooms all facing the same concert area for one guy. And it goes on and on. And his father was a violent sociopath. And that's a heritable quality. And his brother had been arrested. And boy, it goes on and on and on. And there's something like 180 data points that said that Stephen Paddock was reaching a point of criticality.
But
what were we going to do about it?
Well, I don't think you can do anything until he actually does something, because the fact, I think, in this, I mean, if you believe in free will, and of course some people don't, I brought up Sam Harris, he's one who argues it at times, but it's, couldn't he make all, or have all the signs that he was going to do something, and then and again, if you talk to FBI, CIA, I mean, they've investigated people or, had an eye on people who never end up committing a crime, or there's plenty of people that look like they're going to do something and they don't do something. I mean, Steve Paddock's a little bit of an extreme example because there might be more signs there than the average person. But
he could have changed his mind, is what you're saying. You're saying he could have busted the window, pointed his gun at the crowd, and then took his gun and packed it up and went home and said, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a possibility, but we're getting better and better and better at identifying when people are on the verge of doing these things. And the real question is, what can we possibly do about it? We can't arrest you because you might do something. We don't have that means. So this is where I mean that social institutions have to evolve, because as you start to put these algorithms together, and those algorithms go from 80% to 85% to 99.999%, are you going to just let the mass murder happen and then catch them? Or are you going to stand at the door and say, as soon as he shoots the first guy, we run in?
I guess
because then we have a case. I mean, what a waste of data, right?
Yeah, but I mean, this kind of goes, not to get all conspiratorial, but I mean, I think it's, it's it's like that quote, anybody who sacrifices freedom for security, gains neither or loses both, or however it goes. But that, that idea of gaining security and losing freedom for it, I think, the American way, the one thing that, we kind of love about this country is the fact that we don't think it's security is more important than freedom. And if I think that's a small sacrifice to make. It's almost like saying, well, we know that if we let people have the right to have guns, this much gun violence is going to happen. But if we took away everybody's gun, then, we took away people's freedoms to have their gun, maybe there'd be less gun violence statistically. But is that a sacrifice we're willing to make? Is that what's more important for civilization, for the community, for the country, for the people here?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. I can only say that it wasn't a problem before because we didn't have the computing capability nor the data collection that we have today. And now it is a problem because we do know with increasing certainty what is going to happen. Now, I think it's terrible to put that data to waste, particularly if someone I love, my child, has to be shot before you're going to do anything. Yeah, I think that's a problem. On the other hand, as you point out, a person could change their mind. They haven't actually done anything yet. And do we want to live in an oppressive society where people are being arrested because they're in the 99.9 percentile, right, of committing a heinous act? I mean, what are we supposed to do with that information? That's a real question. And you're right. It bumps up against free will and civil liberty. I mean, it really does. But it's something we have to wrestle with. We have to deal with it now because we're getting very close. Very close. We're in the 80 percentile. And you know that the way that technology moves, it moves very fast. We're gonna get up to the 99.9 percentile. And then you know what's going to happen, right? We have all this data. We've identified a person's reaching criticality. They shoot one person and there's a massive lawsuit saying, why didn't you do anything? When the real question is, what could we do? What could we do without having everybody's civil liberties completely trampled over? So, yeah, it's a really difficult question. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we should capture these people, but I'm also saying I don't think we want to throw that data and that capability out with the baby.
How can, the other thing is, how can we be so sure that even if this technology is out there, and I know you talk a lot about predictive analytics, but it's, I've had Thomas Drake on, and it's the same thing, the NSA, I'm sure, a lot of these, William Benny and a lot of these guys, I mean, they had this software and technology, and it was supposed to help people and all this stuff. And of course, some corrupt people end up using it and abusing the technology to spy on everybody, spy on other countries, spy on law-abiding citizens in America. And I mean, so the thing is, I guess when technology advances, the thing that I'm always kind of a little worried about is, okay, well, can this information be corrupted? Can somebody manipulate the information? Can somebody manipulate the information to say, hey, this person's 99 percentile chance of shooting somebody or killing somebody, let's lock them up. And it could be because some personal vendetta with them. I mean, it just, I guess in a perfect world, we like to believe that science and information would be looked at and there's if there's no corruption in the world, we could use it for good. But isn't the danger of obviously people using technology for money, finding more creative ways of making money using technology, or using it for other personal gain, isn't that a concern also?
Well, look, every time we make progress, there's a negative side. You've heard me say that when Charles Lindbergh flew the Atlantic and the Wright brothers, had perfected human flight, they were recipients of a lot of peace prizes, Lindbergh in particular, because it was believed that we could shuttle diplomats from one country to another. And if they had to sit down in front of each other and develop, person-to-person, face-to-face relationships, it would broker more peace in the world. And so they won a bunch of peace prizes. Nobody was thinking at the time that we would use those same planes to drop bombs during warfare. So the same could be said for the internet. The internet has done a lot of wonderful things: teleeducation, telemedicine, right? It's linked people together that didn't have resources before, and it's a wonderful thing. But it also led to identity theft, right? Addiction to pornography. People being able to track other kids. Child molesters can track other kids and get a hold of them over Facebook and chat groups. We didn't have those problems before. So make no mistake, every time we advance in terms of technology and science, there's a dark side to it. There always has been. It will be no different in the future. There'll be a dark side. Does that stop progress or technology? No, it does not. Doesn't matter how we feel about it. We are a creature that moves forward, never back, always forward, until we reach a correction. And that correction is a mass adaptation to what we can handle. But that's pretty much it. So I wouldn't get too caught up in could they take the data? What about our privacy? People are collecting all this data. When people ask me about privacy, I tell them, hey, that train already left the station years ago. I was shocked that everybody was up in arms about the fact that the government was collecting phone metadata. I just laughed that everyone was so concerned about that. If you knew how much data retailers collect on you every minute of every day, you would be shocked.
Yeah, there's a great video on YouTube called "Free is a Lie," and I forget who does the video, but there's plenty of other people who talk about this. Even Douglas Ruskoff, about the price we pay for this technology and what we think is free services. We might not be paying with money, but we're paying with it by giving up our information, our metadata, which is being sold for money. So. Yeah, there's definitely, I think all technology, there is a little give and take with it. There's
always a downside, always. And we need to be aware of it, and we need to look ahead and see what those downsides are, and then put into place some systems that make sure that doesn't happen. This is exactly why I talk about predictive analytics. We're going to get to a point where everything that's going to happen in the future can be predicted with a very high percentage probability. I don't think people really understand what that means. It means group insurance gone. You'll be asked to take a genetic test, and they'll look at certain things, certain markers in your lifestyle. Machine learning computers will determine the probability of the year that you will pass away and what you will pass away from, based on those tests. And with very high percentages, whether you are likely, right now we can predict whether a person is predisposed to become an opioid addict before they get that first prescription within 86%. We know before they take the first opioid whether they're likely to become an addict. And wouldn't that have been great information for every doctor that prescribed an opioid to have about 15 years ago?
Yeah, and Facebook has done studies on their ability to find out. I think I can't remember now if it was when right before a couple was actually going to break up or get together, they could tell when that was going to happen prior to you making it public or before it actually happening, just by knowing like who you're hanging out with and what you're commenting on and all these type of things. And obviously they've done a lot of research too on how manipulating the feed and what you see can have effect on your mood and how you react to things. So yeah, I think that type of stuff gets a little scary, and it gets a little scary to just understand how easily just the public can be manipulated, and there's all these psychologists and scientists that are invested in understanding this, and I think to the average person just going along their lives, they don't understand just all the money and research that's going into affecting their decision making.
Right. And you make a good point earlier. You say, well, doesn't this create predatory conditions where people who have the information and know what words, what actual vocabulary lead to a breakup, and which vocabulary lead to you buying something? You know, the more knowledge they have, can't they use that to manipulate? And the answer is yes. He who has the knowledge, right, has the ability, has the power, has the ability to manipulate others. And that is a downside, and it's very difficult to figure out how to protect that. The only thing I can say is that knowledge doesn't remain proprietary for very long, right? It doesn't, because of the democratization of information on the internet. So you might have something that you know really works well to manipulate people, but the chances are it's going to get out. Some employee leaves your company, tells another company, and pretty soon everybody's doing it. And when everybody does it, it doesn't work.
Yep. Yeah, that's we hit on so many different topics, and the one thing I love about hearing interviews with you is that there's so many things you could talk about, from science to evolution to just transhumanism and technology, that I feel like you have a fascinating insight and just opinion on so many different topics. For my listeners listening, what's the best way? Are you still doing the Costa report?
No, I stopped the radio program about a year ago because I didn't have enough time for my research and writing. And the radio program, as you know, was getting bigger and bigger. We were up on 700 stations across the United States, and it was just turning into a full-time job. And, as successful as it was and as hard as it was to stop, I realized that the bigger it was getting, the more burdensome it was getting for me. My true joy is in research and writing, and I had to kind of come to terms with that. But yeah, my mind's a pretty busy place, as you point out.
Yeah, and I think even though you kind of end up pursuing the lifestyle you kind of wanted of just writing and thinking, right? When you were a kid.
I did. I told my dad before he passed away, I said, well, you're probably really disappointed because I'm as close to a philosopher as there is now. And he laughed about that. And he said, well, you did find a way to make a living doing it, didn't you? So, yeah, we were at peace with that. But it was a long road to get here. It was a long road. And in many ways, I'm grateful to my parents that they didn't let me, go off into the stratosphere, because I got to have a grounded and a normal life. I still go out and work in my garden and do my own home repair. And then I come in and I work on science and technology and go into my office. I get to travel around the world and speak on these topics and come on programs like yours. And so it's a more balanced life than I think I would have had if I had just gone straight into philosophy. So there you have it.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, it's nice to be able to do both and not get so caught up with just research and writing, but also, like you said, having some time with nature and being outside and doing what, like we talked about, is quite natural for us. So, but I thank you so much, Rebecca. I can't thank you enough. What a fascinating conversation. I know your book on the Verge is available everywhere, and I definitely recommend people to check that out, and also check out your other work, The Watchman's Rattle, and obviously your website, RebeccaCosta.com. and I'm always happy to help out or to talk to and help out another Portuguese person, because there's not many of us out there. So I'm always excited. I think I had Mariana Van Zeller on. She's a journalist. And I'm trying to think who else that I had on. That was Manuel Costa. He wrote a book on Columbus, and that's a really interesting book on possibly the roots of Columbus, being from him being born in Portugal, and he's done years of research and stuff. So it's really it's just always fun, because I guess it's kind of the tribal instinct that we still have in us. We're still these kind of tribal people, where it's fun to meet people that are from probably a similar tribe, with similar backgrounds and whatnot. So,
well, it's a tribe to be proud of. Yeah,
absolutely. So, and you said you're Italian too, right? Which is what my kids are, Portuguese and Italian. There's not that much difference. We all like wine. We like to make sausage. We like to eat, and then and have loud conversations and talk over each other. So there's a lot of similarities.
There you go. Well, it's a pleasure to be on your program, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Rebecca, and hopefully we talk again in the near future.
Absolutely.
Take care. Thank you.
Believe in the ripple effect.